Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's panel, People Assets, Is Philadelphia Ready for Commercial Real Estate Investments? We thank you for attending our panel today. And initially, we would like to thank CRE Greater Philadelphia's 2021 annual sponsors. Without our sponsors, we would not be able to do the programming that we do every year. So our premier sponsors are Berkadia, Clemens Construction Company, Fidelity National Title. Our skyscraper sponsors are Brandywine, Dilworth Paxson, Capstan, Herman Miller, Wisfis Bank, KSS, First American Title Insurance Company, Spectrum, Target Building Construction. Our high-rise sponsors are Century Engineering, Brookfield Properties, Land Services USA, Fulton Bank, Archer and Griner, Irwin and Layton, NFI, Wick Fisher White, Fox Rothschild, White and Williams, Kimley Horn, the Harmon Group, O'Donnell and Nacarado, Advantage Fitness, our groundbreaker sponsors, Equus Capital Partners, Greyhawk, JL Architects, NV5 Bach and Clark, Old Forge Builders, and lastly, our affiliate sponsors, Knoll, Rethink Innovations, Hayworth, Kresher Miller, ServPro of Upper Bucks, Germantown, and Pennypack, Bustleton area. We thank you to our sponsors. I would like to just take a moment to note that this panel is being recorded. Next, I just want to acknowledge the CRE Network Foundation. This is a 501c3 foundation that CRE Greater Philadelphia supports. We have 4 pillars or 4 areas that we support through our foundation. One is college scholarships. We support female leaders as they pursue commercial real estate education. Industry research. CRE Network is the leading publisher of research on gender and diversity and inclusion in commercial real estate. We support CRE Careers. We have a classroom program that's hosted by our chapters to introduce high school girls to the many career opportunities in commercial real estate. And lastly, UCRE, which is a program that introduces college students to networking fundamentals, career resources, and relationship building and career development. I would like to introduce our panel host this morning. Carol Horn-Penn is CRE Greater Philadelphia's current president. She is also the Vice President of Business Development and Corporate Relations at Clemens Construction Company. Carol, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone this morning. I'm so happy to have you here. When we actually began to think about what we wanted to talk about for the 2021 program year, we started this back in October. And as you saw, the tenements of our foundation are really about people, about how do we move and advance people in commercial real estate. And that's professionally, that's in our profession. But as we began to look at what's happening in our city and the kinds of projects that are coming along, a lot of our conversation as we were planning our panel on the Hillco development and Navy Yard really kept centering around, are we really ready for all this? Is Philadelphia ready to be the city? We're the city of a first class. We're a great city, but are our people really ready for what's coming? And so as we started thinking about that, we wanted to make sure that as we work on enhancing our image, we push projects like the I-95 cap, we become Silicon Valley, we work on logistics projects and life sciences projects, that everybody is pulling in the right direction. So as we think about the things that are matter to real estate projects, you know, location, tenants, rent, we actually thought the people part of this really needs to be a part of the conversation too. And so we've pulled together a panel today, and I'll let them introduce themselves, of wonderful people, all from different perspectives, to give a sense of what's really being asked of the commercial real estate community when we think about the people in Philadelphia and preparing them for these new opportunities. So with us today is Councilmember Cherelle Parker. She's from the 9th Council District of Philadelphia. Christy Mcguire, she's the Associate Dean of Biomedical Studies with the Wistar Institute, and Fadullon, our Director of the Department of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia, and Darwin Beauvais, a partner and chair of the Zoning and Land Use Department at Dilworth Paxson, a law firm here in Philadelphia. So without further ado, let me introduce Councilwoman Parker, and she will give a brief introduction. You're on mute, Councilwoman Parker.
Can you all hear me now?
We can.
Let me tell you all something. The Zoom gods have been playing with me this morning. It is good to see each and every one of you. I want to just quickly, and thank you for allowing us to start from a place where we get a chance to just speak a little bit about who we are. I grew up in West Oak Lane on a beautiful tree-lined block, the 1900 block of Penfield Street. West Oak Lane and Mount Airy, for those familiar with those sections of the Northwest, know that they were predominantly white communities in the 40s and 50s. And in the late 60s and 70s, there was white flight from those communities, and the opposite of what we're seeing in many neighborhoods across the city now. They became primarily Black communities. And what was so wonderful about the neighborhood during that time is that those homes were brick and stone, beautiful architecture. There was grass, and it really made for a very nice, stable community. And I mean that in every way imaginable. The people there worked 9 times out of 10. This is the first generation of Black people in Philadelphia who had good jobs, pensions, so that was retirement security and health care. They worked at the Bud plant, at Tasty Cake. They worked at the city of Philadelphia. A lot of first generation college graduates. And so that quality of life is something that I know well. So when I get elected to public office in the state house and or in city council, land use becomes extremely important to me, because I know what it meant to stabilize in the community that I grew up in. What's there matters, how it aesthetically looks, the quality of the building materials, the fact that the people who live there have a voice when it's not sort of by right development, to talk about how is what is being proposed for my community going to impact the people who live here. And so when you hear me, and if you talk to any of my colleagues in council, if you would mention zoning and or land use, the first thing they would say is, well, Cherelle and Brian, because Brian O'Neill and I, this is an issue that he and I have really worked very passionately on. And so we care about it because we know how it has impacted our communities. Thank you so much, Carol.
My apologies, Christy.
Thanks, Carol. My name is Dr. Christy Mcguire, and as Carol said, I am Associate Dean at the Wistar Institute. So just to introduce you to the Wistar Institute, the Wistar is our nation's first biomedical research institute. We're located right on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, although we are a independent nonprofit biomedical research institute. Like Councilmember Parker, I am also originally from Philadelphia and was a first generation college graduate myself. So I am deeply passionate about making sure that we have educational and career paths for our young people. I actually spent 11 years as a faculty member at Community College of Philadelphia, working with a program that Community College of Philadelphia and Wistar have had for over 20 years now, called the Biomedical Technician Training Program. And I hope to talk to you more about that during today's panel.
Darwin.
Good morning, everyone. As the token male for today's event, right? I'm very proud to be here. I like Carol mentioned before, I'm the chair of the Zoning and Land Use Department at Dilworth-Paxton. I've been doing land use for the past 15, 20 years. Part of those 20 years, I did it as I was a staffer for city council, and little tidbit, right? You know, the Cherelle Parker was also a staffer. She was a high school intern. And that's when we got to know each other and developed this friendship. But yes, my role has been for the last few years been representing developers, and the topics that we're going to talk about today are very important to developers, right? Even though there can be times where it's frustrating, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of developers want to do the right thing. So thank you.
Thank you. And Anne.
I'm Ann Fadullon. I'm Director of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia. I am not a native Philadelphian. I am a Philadelphian by choice. But I kind of somewhat akin to what Councilwoman Parker said, the town I grew up in, Racine, Wisconsin, a thriving metropolis. When I grew up there, you could graduate from high school and go and get a blue collar factory job and raise your family and support your family. And again, there were benefits, you had a pension, and that was a very viable career choice. And I think we've seen those changes and what happens to, in that environment, right? Not surprising to folks probably, is that a lot of that manufacturing was centered around the farming industry where I grew up. And as farming changed and became an agribusiness and those kinds of things, you saw those jobs go by the wayside. And I think, in some respects that translates well to what we've seen in Philadelphia. And now, Carol gave the introduction where we're seeing Philadelphia morph into something different, right? We're coming out of our industrial background and we're seeing different industries grow in Philadelphia. And as Carol mentioned, and other people on the panel have mentioned, the real key for Philadelphia is to make sure how everybody gets to take advantage of that. And I would say, beyond everybody, in particular, our communities of color, who unfortunately have not been allowed, I would say, to be able to take advantage of some of the great things that are going on in Philadelphia. And we need to really make sure that we are opening those doors wide.
Thank you all. So just for full disclosure, I am not a native Philadelphian either, Anne. And I have chosen Philadelphia as my home, and I love, love, love Philadelphia. And my background, which probably shapes some of my thoughts around this issue, comes from my time when I was at Community Legal Services and also at the University of Pennsylvania doing employee relations. So I have worked with people a lot in my career. And so I have seen people at their worst and I have seen people at their best. And I know that investing in people is very, very important. So with that, I'm going to start with sort of asking Councilwoman Parker, who, we often think of city council as like, oh, city council, but they're there for a reason, right? They are not Darwin, I'm sorry, but they're there for a reason. We elect them, and whether you like them or not, they're there to represent our interests and the issues in our communities. So Councilwoman Parker, if you could speak to what is city council, when you see these developments come through, when you see all this progress happening, and then you push back, why, can you give us some sense of sort of the why behind it as it relates to our topic today on what you're hoping to see from the commercial real estate development community?
No, thank you, Carol. And I love that question because when you pose it the way you just did, it's not an either or, it's an and, because both of those constituencies are long-term owner occupants, along with Philadelphia growing and thriving. We need all of that. But when you talk with my colleagues, I think what you hear from us is that we want a willingness to meet with, to listen to work with the community as part of the development process. Nearly half of our residents are homeowners, which means that for many, their most significant asset is their home. The people's voices matter. They have invested in their neighborhoods. So the importance of building trust and relationships through quite frankly, open and honest and transparent communication cannot be underestimated. So we want to improve the quality of life of our communities through development and ultimately, right, by being a good neighbor. And so, Carl, when we say being a good neighbor and including the community, in the development process, that means don't view me as an adversary. If I want to talk about the quality of the building materials, and how many jobs are going to be created in the building of the structure, and or how many long-term jobs are they? What will the quality of the jobs be? Those are things that people who have their greatest asset in being homeowners, they have a right to ask. Now, listen, I, as a district council person, don't always agree with the community at large on some of the land use decisions that have come before us. I also don't always agree with the developer, but my job is to try to have a happy medium and bring both entities together. How does the council office help? I would argue when we're at our pinnacle, we help you by engaging the community, hosting the meetings, conducting surveys, reviewing feedback, mediating issues, connecting with workforce development. That's why Christy, I'm in love with Christy and what they're doing with Wistar. Technical assistance through city departments such as commerce and planning. Like if I'm trying to get something done, I'm on the phone, and this is great. I want it in my district. How can you help me get it done? And that's what I should be doing. And then the commercial real estate tax abatement, it remains at 90%. The reduction effective on January, 22. Some of us caught hell, Carl. We caught hell, still catch hell, about that very tough vote. But for those of us who want to see Philadelphia grow, it wasn't either or, it was an and. How do we use this as a tool to grow the city's economy? So we're partners, not adversaries.
Understood. So thinking about Darwin's in a position where he represents multiple developers. How Darwin, maybe you'll speak to sort of how do you then work with the councilwoman to address the issues that her community might be raising? And the councilwoman actually introduced in 2017 a piece of legislation that created this project information form, which the development community was not so happy about initially. So maybe you can speak to how that intersection of the issues that the councilwoman is speaking to comes out, and how maybe this project information form is starting to be utilized and informing what's happening.
Yeah, so the project information form was enacted by City Council, sponsored by Councilwoman Parker, and I think the first reaction that a lot of developers that I spoke to, it was, oh my God, there's another hoop to jump through. And we were told by the powers that be that don't worry, all it is just putting it's a form. So now it's not a big deal in terms of what has to be done. It's just part of our checklist now, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it serves a very good purpose because it gives notice. Now, if you're a nefarious developer, which I don't represent those, they don't want to give notice. They want to hide as much as they can, but genuine developers that understand the impact of their development, yeah, the project information form gives notice, lets the community know what exactly is going to be done. And honestly, those genuine developers would have done that anyway. So having this project, if you're a good developer, you look at the project information form and you say, okay, fine, it's just another administrative checklist that we have to attend to. If you're not a good developer, then you have other issues. Now, given that though, I want to comment to something that the councilwoman said. People may not like city council with what they're doing because they always have to make the hard choice. But on this side of the coin, what I tend to do, I look to council for leadership because they are the ones that are always dealing with the community. My developers are trying to engage that certain neighborhood, that block, those particular residents, and I'm trying to develop a relationship with them. My developer is trying to develop a relationship with them, right? But who better to negotiate that relationship than the council person? And I can be a pest in order to try to get the council person to help us engage the community. And I also understand, I think those of us in the profession will understand that if you're going to engage the community, you also have to be mindful of whatever politics are involved. And I come across that a lot. So I'm saying all of this to say I understand the tensions that the councilwoman goes through, because on this side of the coin, there's those tension does exist, but a little bit differently.
So Anne, you see these tensions a little differently in your department, because often my understanding is many developers find you in your office before they find many other people. They might have found Darwin because they need a lawyer, but they may not know who the council person is. They may not understand the complexity, and I'll put that in quotes, the complexity of our development community. And I mean, I've heard once people go to Montgomery County and other counties and other areas, it doesn't feel as complex. At Philadelphia, it feels at least you understand the path. But saying that, and back to our topic for today, I mean, there is this sort of issue around developers show up at your doorstep, they're trying to understand the landscape, and how do you set them up to be successful against the strong council people like Councilwoman Parker, who are district representatives versus just at-large members who really have an interest there, and helping their council like Darwin be successful in moving those projects forward?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things, right, is that people do find us. And one of the reasons they find us is because we try to make ourselves as available as possible. Although the schedule makes it difficult sometimes, we pretty much don't say to anybody, no, we can't meet with you, or you got to do this, or we'll meet with you later. We say, yeah, come on in, let's have a conversation. And I think that's the key, is having a conversation. And when we have the conversation with the developer, we tell them, yes, you have to have a relationship with the council person. And sometimes we help to bridge that gap. I would hope that Councilwoman Parker agrees that our department has a pretty good relationship with council, again, because we're really willing to sit down and talk. Sometimes the councilwoman calls me, or other council people call me, and they say something and I'm like, I'm not quite there, or they're not quite where we are, but we're willing to have the conversation and understand that we are, to a large extent, we want the same thing, right? We want quality communities for everybody. And if we start there, we may not have the exact same method to get there, but I think we can usually find enough common ground to sort of figure that out. And I would say too, when developers come to us, we also try to explain to them that these communities have existed a long time. And even though maybe not on the surface, they don't see the strength, every community in Philadelphia has strength. And probably the biggest strength, in fact, definitely the biggest strength of every one of these communities is the residents that live there. And you have to be respectful of that. And you have to be willing to work with them and to make sure that your development sort of goes along with. And we tell people developers pretty harshly up front, you are not saving this neighborhood. If you come in here with that attitude that your development is the most important thing and you're saving this neighborhood, you're going to get shut down. And because you need to really work with people. I mean, think about if all of us here sat and thought, okay, there's going to be this new development, it's coming into our community. What are the things we'd want to know about? Would we want to say, I'm sorry, your voice doesn't matter here? Like, those are the people essentially just want to be informed. The project information form is a great example of that. I just want to know what's going on in the community. And by the way, this is my community. I've lived here for either a long time or a short time or whatever. And I just want to make sure that it fits in. And so we definitely encourage conversations with the developers. And then, yes, we sit down and we explain how the process works. And we provide assistance to try to help the developers get through that whole process until, oftentimes until they get a certificate of occupancy and their project opens up, because we know there's issues all along the way.
So developers think about cap rates, developers think about IRRs, developers think about, it's an investment. So people don't like to think about real estate as an investment, but it is a different class of investments as compared to stocks. And for the majority of people who are doing commercial real estate, they see it as a commodity. It could be conceived as a commodity, right? It's one more piece in my portfolio. How Anne, are you helping to, how can the city, I'm not even saying your office, but how can the city position developers to value, to know that their ROI, everyone appreciates their ROI, return on investment, but that should they be incentivized? Why should they even care to worry about the issues that we're talking about now, the people who live in the neighborhoods of Philadelphia? What is the value add to them to do that? And what's the purpose, and how does the city help move that forward?
Yeah, so, I think we've got an understanding of that. Some folks know I came out, I did some public service, and then I was in the private sector, and I came out of the development world. I've done it, right? I've signed that personal guarantee. And I get what you put on the line then, right? Now I'm back in public service, but I think a lot of the things we've talked about, right? You are developers. So a couple things. One is, there's the difference between doing development and investing in stocks, and those is definitely the people, right? When you buy a stock, you're not going into a neighborhood, you're not having that kind of impact. So it's a different type of investment. But then it is still an investment. And I think what we're asking developers is to just sort of balance that with that people investment as well, but also to understand that if you have a community that's coming with you in your development, that community is going to feel like they have some ownership of it as well, and they're going to protect that investment for you. And that is definitely in a developer's self-interest to have a community that is there supporting, that's willing to further protect and sort of hone that investment. And that adds value to a development rather than a community that's against it that may, to an extreme end up vandalizing it, or maybe not supporting the businesses that are in it, or things like that are going to hit the bottom line and hurt the bottom line. Rather than if you work with a community, and we're seeing some developers get really creative and do crowdfunding. So literally the community has ownership. And you're finding that those are the kinds of developments that have a long lifespan in neighborhoods because they've got that support, and that definitely adds to a developer's bottom line.
So Christy, you have a little bit of a different bent on all of this, because you have actually been investing in the people and preparing them for our new Silicon Valley. So you are working on helping people in our neighborhoods be prepared for new employment in Philadelphia. Can you speak a little bit as to why that happened, and how the city and the development community can be supportive of the work that you and others do in this kind of space?
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, so even before Philadelphia was aiming to become the next Silicon Valley, right? We've always had this industry of med and ed, of which biomedical research really, fits in with those. And I did want to pick up on what Anne said about partnerships. So Wistar is a great partner. We have lots of partnerships with educational institutions because we're a .org, not a .edu. And then we also have a lot of partnerships with biotechnology and biopharmaceutical companies. So we're a good partner, but we actually reached out to Community College of Philadelphia back in 2000 to really help our own workforce of laboratory technicians and research assistants, to create a diverse and skilled workforce for Wistar. Over the course of the last 20 years, though, we've also, been able to not just provide laboratory technicians and research assistants for the Wistar Institute, but for those other, educational and industry companies in Philadelphia and the greater Philadelphia region. One of the great things about our program, though, is it hasn't just been successful in getting individuals into those entry-level positions. And again, picking up on what Anne said about connections, right? A lot of what our program does is help make connections for individuals who don't have those connections in this industry. So, not only have we been successful with helping, make those connections for students looking to get into biomedical research, but we've also, our program has had an even bigger impact on, empowering those students to continue their education, complete the associate degree at Community College of Philadelphia, and then even continue their education in often what we call a learn and earn model, right? So, not many people anymore have the luxury of being able to, go to college, at 18, full-time as a full-time student. A lot of individuals are going through college later, and they're supporting themselves. So they need to be able to work while they do that. And wouldn't it be great if they can work in the industry that they're actually, looking to get into?
So what has been the impact on the families that have gone through your program? Do you track that, the success of those families?
So we haven't tracked it on a family basis, but on an individual basis. So within 1 year of completing our program, 46% of individuals are working in the industry, but 64% are continuing their education. And again, knowing that, this is an entry level position that can lead to an education or career pathway. I think one thing, that would help all of us is there are a lot of different training programs that exist in Philadelphia. So when we ask the question, is Philadelphia ready, right? We have a lot of great training programs in different industries, not just our biomedical technician training program that we're really proud of at the Wistar Institute. But it's really helping these companies make connections to what's available. And and that's something that during the development process and during that project information form process with the city, that would be a great time to make those connections to who is actually going to be working in that industry once the property is developed.
So one of the things often that happens is, and as developments come through, you've got your project information form. It's a large enough project and the impact is great enough that a community benefits agreement is structured. So Darwin, and if you could speak to if there's a way to connect the work that Christy is doing to a community benefits agreement. Often the focus, and I work for a construction company, is focused on jobs, which I will call itinerant jobs. They are jobs that are like farm worker jobs. There's nothing bad about being a farm worker. There's nothing bad about being a construction worker. In fact, it's a wonderful job. But you go from this job to that job and this job to that job. It is not what most people think of, as Christy described it, as a job that you will have and you will go to one employer and you will be there for 15 years. And as the councilwoman and Ann talked about, having this brass ring at the end with a pension or 401k. It's not that kind of job. And I think when people in the community think of jobs, they look at construction, and it's an easy thing because it's happening right in front of you. But how do you move away from the construction job, which is maybe going to happen, and maybe you can work there for 2 days and then you've got to go somewhere else? How do we connect in the CBA world, the community benefits agreement, these opportunities with these training programs to redirect some of the energy in the communities to these longer term opportunities, which really are transformative?
Well, I think that's a great question, because as I've gone in front of City Council to get projects approved, Council is doing a good job realizing that they're tired of hearing construction jobs. They're tired of hearing about those temporary jobs that you've outlined. So again, those genuine developers that really want to make a difference, they don't look, they try to look beyond the construction and to make an investment into that community. And yes, that's usually done through a community benefits agreement, and the purpose of it is to outline what that investment will look like. So, and we're not just talking about we're going to just build a park, and which is also a good thing, but if you're going to talk about long-term jobs and making sure that the community can have the lifestyle that we all grew up with, you have to somehow make an investment. So there have been genuine developers that have partnered with all the small businesses in that area to try to somehow get those small businesses to locally source whatever it is that they can produce in order for the developer and or their commercial tenants and or their constituency can benefit from. They can do it by creating a community loan program. They can actually do it by partnering if with the neighborhood in doing small development. These are main things that I've seen in a lot of projects throughout the city, and I think it could work here. But I would caution this, and this is a message to the councilwoman: please do not legislate that, because that in itself, because every community is different, every need will be different, and having even if you were to legislate saying you have to pick from all these things, it still may not be good enough. So I think negotiating, being at the table, helping everyone identify what the proper needs would be, that in order for there to be meaningful investment in that community that will be reduced to writing to community benefits agreement, I think that's perfect. Right now, the zoning code doesn't acknowledge community benefits agreement. It's a private agreement between the developer and the neighborhood. So, but I do know this: community developer will welcome City Council's unofficial support and efforts in trying to negotiate one.
So, Anne, thinking about other cities, and I was actually thinking about a thing we use in CRE for management of our chapters, and it's called a toolkit. So we create these toolkits so that we can create consistency across chapters across the world. And I wonder, is there a toolkit that you provide to developers or that encompass these kinds of issues related to job training and other tools that they might be able to utilize as they're thinking about what resources are available in our city, what places that they can go to make those connections, to somehow make, when they're beginning to have these conversations with the community, they're more informed, like they have more information to allow them to come to the table with solutions. Because I've often sat in those conversations and, you know, you're the developer, right? So people look to you and they're like, well, what are you doing? Right? What are you offering? And I think they're at a disadvantage because they don't always know. They're from out of town, or this is the first time they're doing it, and they don't have the answers, and it puts everybody in an uncomfortable position. So I wonder, as we do more development, as we need more training, as we need more resources, how do we then, is there a toolkit that we give to developers that focuses on this piece of what we do to help them?
Yeah, and that's an interesting idea. We don't have a toolkit. We do have very intentional conversations with developers, but to your point, it's a little bit difficult because I'll just, you know, an example. Recently, we've talked to a developer and we've said, you know, you got to give us more about what you're doing, and not just the EOP plan, the economic opportunity plan, which is ends up being the focus, which is really mostly about construction and hiring during construction. And to your point, Carol, you know, those are not necessarily permanent jobs because, as you know, and as a contractor, oftentimes, let's say you're doing a job in West Philly and you're required to hire people from West Philly, right? And so you do, but then when you go to North Philadelphia, you don't get any credit for those people that you hired in West Philly. And so there's no incentive for you to continue to employ them, right? Because when you go to North Philly, you have to hire somebody from North Philly and you're not creating the permanent jobs. And, you know, also those are like best efforts and things like that. And so it hasn't traditionally, honestly, gotten to the point where to the levels and to the success rate we would like to see. And so we've been pushing developers to say, we're not talking about an EOP plan. And I would say particularly on the larger scale projects that are now getting proposed for the Philadelphia, where someone will say, well, you know, it's a multi-phase, it's a 10 or 15 or 20-year build out. That gives you plenty of time to figure out how to have job training and things like that, so that whoever's going to be the occupant of that, you know, phase 3 that's built in 10 years, you know, are you talking to high school, or what are you doing about high school education now, or middle school education in some extent? And I think if we did have sort of, these are the various resources, the city has been taking a step back sort of to guide to some extent, because we are not a party of these community benefits agreements. We do not want to be a party to these community benefits agreements. So we don't sort of hand it in a nice little package and say, okay, here, this is what you're going to do in this project in this neighborhood. But I think you need to get creative about true equity participation. Not just are you having, you know, minorities or small business partners, but are you able to offer an equity component to that community? What are you doing about long-term job creating? What are you doing about the jobs in your own development company? And do you have realistic expectations? Does every job really need a college education, right? Or is that just a screening mechanism that you're using? And how much are you giving credence to experience versus education? I mean, we've got that issue, frankly, in the city, right? Someone can have 10 years of experience, but they don't have this degree. And it's like, well, sorry, you don't have this. They've got 10 years of experience of doing that job already. Like, what is that about? And so I think there's all these things. And to Darwin's point, yeah, community amenities like a park, those are great things, and things that, you know, if the city doesn't have to build that park, we could potentially use those resources to something else. Early access to food, access to early childhood education, all of those things that help, again, support that community, because a strong community is going to make your project that much stronger. So could we look at a guidebook that would just be a list of these resources? Yeah, and I think that's something we'll look at. But we also, I'll just tell you this, every developer out there pretty much, except for the really small ones, are way better resource than the city is. And so to some extent, we are going to rely on the developers to do some of this legwork as well, but we can definitely try to put something together to point them in the right direction. But we want people to get creative. And you know what, saying you're doing an EOP and signing an EOP, that's just not going to cut it anymore. We all have to do more. Because to your point, Carol, about the beginning, like, we are a first-class city, and the way we're going to make it successful for everybody is we have to believe it. We have to believe that we are going to be the successful first-class city that we all know we can be, but we have to really believe it. And in order to really believe it, and not just speak to it and have our actions show that, we have to put forefront investing in our own people.
And everything, I agree with everything you just said, right? You know, and I love the passion, because that is something that developers will appreciate. And I use that passion to let them know that we have to move the needle. But you did say something, and that you know, stuck a little bit to me. Developers aren't necessarily ready to give equity in a project. We'll do an investment, but to give equity in a project, that's a little bit difficult, and it scares a lot of developers. If one were to lead with that, I know they would say, thank you very much. We're going to do a different project, right? Because they've already at least preliminarily put pen to paper. They have their pro forma. They know where they can give but the minute that you say, all right, you have to take money from your investors in order to give equity to somebody else, I think that it scares a lot of people. Not saying that it won't be done, but I just want everybody here to know that's not a simple thing to ask.
It's not a simple thing to ask, Darwin, but I'm going to push back on you a little bit, because it's been done, right? So we have a developer in the city who's done it. I know at the Navy Yard, it is an integral part of the development plan at the Navy Yard to have some crowdfunding opportunity for the citizens of Philadelphia to participate in their asset as it develops. So I think the notion of, back to my earlier comment, of commercial real estate being an investment and wanting people to be able to grow in their wealth, everyone to grow in their wealth, it definitely provides an opportunity for the average person to invest in something that has a very high upside. Look, there's a huge downside too, but often a very high upside and something they wouldn't be able to access. So you know, it's an interesting conversation. I think it's a really important conversation, and I would encourage, we probably want to have Mosaic, who's been leading this work, really talk to the benefit of those kinds of initiatives and why they have moved in that direction. And as they build out the model for the Navy Yard, I think it'll be a really interesting conversation to see, is that a successful model, and does that begin to change the trajectory of how cities and developers can work together to invest in community. So
and I completely agree with that. And the only difference with what you just described was that it was put on the table at the beginning. And if you're suggesting that the development process should start at the beginning with a conversation with the community, that's something else, but that tends to not be the case. A developer will say, okay, I'm looking at these several lots of land. I think I want to do a mixed use project. This is what I think it will cost me. Let me get the investors. Oh, now I'm being asked, I have to give anywhere from 2 to 5% in equity. That I will have to come back, and if the numbers don't work, I will walk away. Now, or the numbers can work. I just don't know. I'm just saying it's not going to be easy. Don't expect a developer to just at a community meeting say, okay, we'll give that to you.
I think
Carl, I'm sorry, you have to let me interject here. I have been much more disciplined than I normally am, and and both Ann and Darwin know that well. Let me just quickly go back to the PIFs and the reason why. the reason why we knew we needed some sort of standard information form is because all registered community organizations in the city of Philadelphia are not created equal. Each of them, depending on where they are, they may have a level of sophistication and or talent that we don't see everywhere. So that community benefits agreement that you just talked about, that is not recognized in the code and that is not enforced by L&I. Some communities don't even know what it should include. In addition to that, I want to note that when we talk about equity, if there is a developer in 2021 here in the city of Philadelphia who would say, I'm thinking about developing without equity being first and foremost, considering where we've been as a nation and a city for the past, last year, in particular, I say that they're just, I don't know how present they are. In addition to that, what a very limited scope of thinking about what equity means when someone says you have to have equity. Equity means that this is what I want to do. You want to maximize the efficient, use of the scarce resources that you have. You want to make money for the investors, but make the impact and benefit to the community where you're going to develop a primary part of your decision making. Because if you do it, guess what? That means Christy's going to come to mind. That means that when you thought about how it would impact the community, Christy Wistar partnered with CCP 21 years ago, before people even got that we should be looking at what industries are growing in Philadelphia, and then how do we make sure that we have a pipeline to it. So equity means, have I thought using an innovative approach to, bring the Christies and the Wistars in to connect the people in the community to access the opportunity. So Darwin, to me, when you go back and talk to those big guys, let them know that when we say equity, we're not necessarily talking about you have to give $1 million to the community organization every year because to be quite frank, that can even be fleeting. Although if it was $1 million, that would be okay. I could tell them how to spend it. But nevertheless, what I'm saying to you is, I want us to become much more innovative in how we think and creative in the partners that we bring into the process. And we expect it from the development community because you have access to the resources. So what the ads and meds are here. Why should BIA or GBCA or any group of developers not say, you know what, in good faith, particularly for good actors, these are the things that we've done and we've included in community benefits agreements. So Carl, when you talk about that developer that's not from Philadelphia who comes in and they don't have a clue, they only know what they're trying to do and they want to add value. Wouldn't it be great, not if Ann Fadullon in development or Cherelle Parker Darwin, the legislative branch, coming in to tell the development community what's best for them, but wouldn't it be great if the development community itself, I'm with you, Ann, develop this own set of its Bible. These are some potential elements that have been included in CBAs over the years that in an effort to make sure our development is having an equitably beneficial impact on the people and all communities in Philadelphia, you could take a look at this. So that's what I want. I don't want to decide in council on everything, but we act and develop legislative initiatives like the project information form when we see that Rittenhouse Square, Logan Square, and Chestnut Hill, the quality of the building materials, it's brick and stone. And then when I won't say the name of the firm, they came to build in my area, and they're going to build this new building in this new store. And when we look at the plans, it's all vinyl siding. And I say, hell no, you wouldn't do that in Logan Square or Rittenhouse Square or Chestnut Hill, because the people in that RCO, they wouldn't allow that to happen. So when you come to our community, the same care that you would give to thinking about what your development will look like. You need to do it all over the city. So I love my Darwin, and he gives another perspective, and I appreciated Darwin, but my hope is that just like you want us to government to be more innovative, what 1.4 billion trillion is coming down. Let me say this to you. If we are not trying to figure out how workforce development, that new potentially free community college, I don't know how many of y'all saw that come in out of President Biden's my mind, I'm thinking, I'm saying, oh my God, imagine if all of the industries and the eds and meds and those that are growing, if community college is going to be free, please tell me that there's a pipeline to connect that free education with all of the jobs that are growing. So no more will a owner of any business come to council and say, well, unfortunately, there's a skills gap here in the city of Philadelphia, and the people we need are not qualified enough for these jobs, and so we have to recruit in every other place except for the city of Philadelphia. That's what I'm hoping. I'm sorry, Carol.
No.
Holding a lot back.
No, I just have to say that I don't want to get beat up anymore. So I have Ann, I have
and
Parker,
lead with yes,
I got
Star. When you
Carol.
don't want to get beat up, lead with yes, not no, we can't, because we've already figured this out before we came to you.
No,
Lead with yes. Okay, we considered this at the beginning before we came to you, knowing that you were going to ask for these things. And let me just be clear. I'm not saying give equity. I'm saying offer equity opportunities to other folks. Right? Offer it. There's a way to get the community. It's not you're giving it away. The community's putting their hard dollar to work in your project. That's not giving it away. Or having a minority partner who's bringing maybe not exactly money to the table, but services or other things that you'd have to pay somebody else for. That's not giving it away. That's working in community and helping to build so that maybe a larger percentage of the population can benefit and take advantage of from something. And yeah, you better walk in with an open mind, because that's how your project's going to get done in Philly. Because again, back to first class city, we've got a product that people want. Philadelphia, this is a product that people want. And so we're going to start asking for stuff in return. We're not just giving it away, begging you to come here. We definitely want investment. We definitely want development. We need it. We understand the bottom line and that has to work, but we also understand that if the city is going to be this city we all know it can be, we've got to do a better job of making sure that whatever we do here benefits as many of our residents as possible.
And I'm just going to pick up on Councilwoman.
Oh, you want to beat
Parker.
me up too? Go ahead, Chris.
This is not the beat up on Darwin show.
If there's anybody on the Q&A that wants to beat me up, just raise your hand now.
To reframe the skills gap as an opportunity gap, right? And for industries to ask themselves, how can they, prepare high school students, community college students, even for your graduates to enter the workplace. And I think that's what we need to be doing more of. And I will give a shout out to Philadelphia Works, our workforce development board. So I have been trained as an apprentice navigator. So our biomedical technician training program at the Wistar Institute is now leads into a registered biomedical research technician apprenticeship program. And, there's a big push to take apprenticeship, which has been a great, way to bridge that skills gap for individuals in manufacturing, now advanced manufacturing, historically the trades, and actually introduce that model into non-traditional career paths like our biomedical research technician or, other healthcare, early childhood education. We've got a number of great apprenticeship programs already in Philadelphia. And with this apprenticeship navigator cohort that's just about to finish, a lot of individuals trained as intermediaries to help that process. So to work with companies and, help develop these different types of skills training programs, including an apprenticeship model.
So Christy, I think that's actually really good to know, and I'm hoping that there's going to be some way to push people and developers to this apprenticeship navigator resource, because I think it'll be very useful. I have one quick question for you, and then I want to take questions from our chat area. The cost, how much does it actually cost to run a program like your program? Just curious.
So it's about $25,000 for each individual that comes through our program. And Wistar completely supports those costs through our own institutional funding, and then also through grants and philanthropic donations. We're 501c3. So
Is that cost fully paid for that? So the community college doesn't have to put any money in? It's
no,
paid
the community college does not put any money in to the program. They support the program through having my former position, but now, an academic coordinator to help act as an advisor and help recruit and select students for the program. So they support the program in that way. And through grant funding from the state of Pennsylvania, the PA SMART program, we've actually been able to cover the costs for the credits associated with the program for students of the program the last couple of years. So not only does the Wistar Institute pay the students during the whole training, but we've also been able to, cover some of those tuition costs.
No, it's helpful to know that, because I know the cost on the construction side for these kinds of programs, so it's good to hear what the cost is for that kind of laboratory pre-development program. So we have a question from the our audience that really focuses on a somewhat controversial city council related issue, the councilmanic prerogative. And I recently read an article this Sunday with one of our newer council members who they suggested that she valued the prerogative, but I think was trying to balance the prerogative to push developments with the sort of notion of how do you level the playing field so it's fair for the development community to all have access to a project and to move their projects forward. And I think the council has regulated itself and is trying really hard to assure that there aren't any inappropriate transfers of property. And I know that your office and the redevelopment authority is working very hard to manage public land sales. But maybe it's worth answering that question about sort of how are we moving forward around public land sales and transfers of property, so that while it's really important that for the issues we've talked about earlier today, for council to weigh in and be a part of the process, there isn't we are getting past the issues of because I said so it will be, that we're trying to create more transparency and fairness to the process, but to get what the community needs. And will you take that, and maybe then Councilwoman Parker follow, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think, honestly, working with council, we really, there was a pretty significant change to the land disposition process that went into effect early January 1, 2020. And so I'll just say we didn't get too far into being able to implement that before the pandemic shut everything down. But we are pretty well up and running on that again. And I do think it adds transparency, particularly to the disposition process. It makes it very clear, what is a competitive sale. And we posted RFPs and we posted certain properties up to bid. And we do that in consultation with the council district, because there's a council action that's required per the city charter. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to get very far into the process if we don't think it's something that the council person is going to be supportive of. And I think, and obviously Councilwoman Parker can speak to this very well, is basically what we hear back from the council person is what they're hearing from the community about what they want to see in their communities. And, I do think in different areas, different things are prioritized. Some areas really want to see a lot of side yards disposed of because residents have been taking care of those properties for years. And even though now they may have a higher value, do you really say, okay, you've taken care of this on behalf of the city to some extent for 20 or 25 years, but sorry, now the value's higher. We're going to give it to some other, developer and sell it at the highest price, and they're going to build something next to your home. That, so we're trying to balance those. And then also in our higher market areas, again, we may be able to sell something for a large amount of money, but given it's public property, that may be our only opportunity to keep affordability in those neighborhoods. And so I think it's really, or food access, right? Maybe a community garden for fresh food access. So I think it's really balancing these policy issues, and that's not an easy path, because again, sometimes the community wants something. We know we need development in the city to add to our tax base. We know we have a challenged city budget, so there's also pressure to get as much as you possibly can for every property, and you have to try to figure out what is, what's the right line to do that. And there's a lot of different voices at the table, and an example of that is, I think it was my budget hearing a couple years ago, and I had one council person say, you must sell off everything to the highest bidder. And I had another council person say, you must provide everything for a community garden and a side yard. And I had another council person say, you must provide everything for affordable housing. And I think I stopped and said, okay, you want this, you want this, you want that. And my answer to all of you is supposed to be yes, right? It's complicated, and it's more complicated because now our land has value. So a lot of the things that we did 10, 15, 20 years ago, when we were just like, please take our land for anything, or that's not the case anymore. And we really have to be thoughtful about it. And that's complicated and it's messy. And we definitely want to do that in partnership with communities and the council district offices.
And the only thing I would add to that is and I don't know, just now when you were answering that question, I was almost ready to switch you over from the administrative side into the legislative side, because you did that extremely well, my dear. Okay. In all seriousness, let me just say this. And thank you for acknowledging council's legislative action that we took to ensure that transparency in our, land ownership process was something that was a priority for us as well. And, the role of a council person in land disposition. Thank you for acknowledging it, because sometimes when we do stuff right, and nobody ever talks about what we do right. So thank you for acknowledging that we, attempted that correction ourselves. But I also want to go back to this. There is no one size fits all way. I mean, we just had some legislation that was just passed in city council. One of my colleagues, is going to be passed. She worked for a very long time on that legislation with planning. However, when my team and I go through the legislation, we said, oh, hell no. Imagine if, the 1,440, square foot, use now that gives the developer the ability to build was reduced to about, was it 900 feet and 990 feet? That means that every little slither that you could think of land. I said the people in the 9th Councilmember District would go to hell crazy because we have a menu. We have singles, we have twins, we have people who have access to land. And the idea that you would have reduced the size of the lot, it would not have boded well with residents here. As the district council person, I went through that. I don't have the bill in front of me. There were about 2 or 3 more issues. I think the amount of units that were allowed that would not bode well for the 9th district. And it's my job, because my primary responsibility is to oversee land use, to know that, to be able to say, well, if that's something you want to do in the 9th district, you're going to have to go through the land use process and meet with the RCO in the community, because this is not something that we can vote in favor of to give you the power to just do it by right. We just can't do it. And the council members whose districts were similarly situated, who agreed with me, we can't be, I don't think we should be viewed as villains, because we know the quality of life in our neighborhood and the kind of development that residents who live here are interested in seeing. So if you want to, build on, and did you say 960 square feet? Guess what, developer, you can propose it, but when Darwin comes, Darwin and the developer has to make the case about why, and then you let the community decide. And so from that perspective, if it were to have, let's say, passed, and the residents of this district found out that Cherelle Parker didn't stand up and say, no, not here, my tail, I would be grass. That'll be it.
No, I think that's a very good point. And,
Can I make a comment just on a private side
please
about
do.
councilmatic prerogative? People give it a bad rap, but for the reasons that you mentioned, Councilwoman, you understand your district, and because development has the unknown quantity as development are people, that you are the best indicator as to how this development will work. So if I have the residents supporting the project, you're supporting the project, right? And we've done all that work, I think will be unfair to a developer to have other people, your colleagues vote against the project if we've already done the due diligence. And so that's so I support councilmatic prerogatives. I don't, it could stay forever for all I care.
Well, because I think you're saying when it's done right, it's done well.
Yep.
So question for Christy, you put in the chat box information about the WISTAR program, the Apprenticeship Navigator, is that something that will be announced more publicly soon? And how will we make sure that our council people and our citizens are aware of those opportunities?
Yeah, so we're all just finishing the Apprenticeship Navigator program. So when our first cohort graduates, I'm sure there will be an announcement through Philadelphia Works, the apprenticeship, PHL Apprenticeship Philadelphia. I'm also going to put my contact in the chat. So, again, programs like what we have at WISTAR, we're registered as a group apprenticeship program. So we can add companies into our, pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship program that are already established. So, for small biotech companies coming to Philadelphia, that's a great option to tap into what already exists. And then for larger companies through this Apprenticeship Navigator training, right, I can help them develop their own programs in the biotech and biopharma sector. So
knowing that you are partially funding it and then know the path to funding for these programs, would it be safe to say for a developer or new gene and cell therapy company coming into Philadelphia, or who's existing in Philadelphia, and they wanted to invest in this kind of work, that they're not paying $25,000 per student, that they can make a more modest investment, but also contribute to the advancement of that program here in Philadelphia?
Correct. Yeah, we really know how to, over 20 years, have learned how to pull together funding sources to support those costs. Obviously, we would always welcome more funding sources. So this is a great place where we can have some advocacy at the, city, state, and federal level to support, training programs through more grant opportunities or, any type of funding. But those connections are really important, right? So, we need places to train in the pre-apprenticeship and then to hire our graduates as part of the apprenticeship. So, those connections are really important for training programs so that we are, bridging that gap, that we are really connecting, the students and the residents of Philadelphia with the, the good family sustaining positions.
So as there was an article in yesterday's paper that reflected on buildings being transformed in Philadelphia, older buildings being transformed into cell and gene therapy spaces. So that's kind of one of, for our landlord community, for others on this call who are seeking tenants to fill that space, or have people who are interested, knowing that kind of program that Christy and the Wistar Institute is offering is really a nice linkage. It's a nice way of, it's not necessarily on the side of like you're building something, but where you are looking to put in some kind of community contribution and you're looking to direct those resources. I think the program that Wistar is offering and the community college is offering is just one, as we think about, as we all want to advance this idea of becoming this really advanced community for cell and gene therapy. We all can think about how do we support that and other types of programs. And so my last question is going to be really around this whole, try to tie it back, which is this notion of social impact. I know that the RDA and recent RFPs have been putting in the idea of social impact. And I think that's trying to get at this sort of question of how do we, when we control a piece of land, add that sort of what social impact is. So Anne, if you might describe what social impact is, and then Darwin, if you might sort of reflect on how as a private developer without the city's influence might be able to take the concept of a social impact and utilize it in private development, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, so basically the concept of social impact is, what is the project giving back to the community? Not necessarily under a community benefits agreement, but what is being incorporated into the development itself that provides something back to the community? Whether, again, there's a, fresh food access, or could be you have a grocery store in your development, or you have public amenity space, which is, open space that's open to the public, or some kind of amenity. Could be early childhood education, or some kind of educational component that, again, could just be an educational facility leasing up a portion of your project, or affordable housing is always in there. And then it could be things like, are you associating your retail space? Is there something that you are, you're going to offer a little bit below market rents to neighborhood businesses, or something like that? Or are you associating your end user with something like the Wistar program and job training? And we really have said, given some examples, that's a place where we do sort of have some sort of definition and some examples. But we've, to Darwin's earlier point about equity, right? We've kind of left it up to the developer to come to us with a proposal, because so that we are not dictating to the developer that you must do this or you must do that, because we want that social impact to work within the development proposal. But you have to have it. And it's not once a year we do a food drive. That's not what we're looking for, right? We're really looking for something about the development, a component in the development project itself is really about giving back to the community, or making sure that there's some part of your development that is a permanent benefit to the community.
And I think that's the advice, and that's the point that a lot of the genuine developers that I deal with actually understand and try to effectuate. So whether or not you're in Somerton in the Northeast, or whether you're in West Oak Lane, or whether you're in Brysburg, these social impacts will take different forms. And it will be up to the developer to try to figure out how best to make that decision in order to provide that amenity or that addition to the community. I think working with the council person helps. I think whether it's food access, and I have a project in West Philadelphia where the anchor is a supermarket, or it could be a public amenity, like Ann mentioned, in a different part in South Philly. It all depends on what what that community should have. Now, in how to decide that, again, I think everybody who wants to truly help or wants to be a genuine developer has to roll up their sleeves and sit down with the neighbors. They have to be able to sift through all of their angst as well, because I believe Ann mentioned it at the beginning, the project can't save everything. And even though that she said it to calm developers down, but I'm saying it, when you have a genuine developer, the neighbors have to also understand that. We cannot solve everything, but to make sure that we can get the biggest bang for our buck, what is it that we could do? Should we provide a supermarket? We will make our commercial space the prime for a supermarket anchor. Is it that we should rebuild some sort of historic icon, this former library, or the Ryer's house in Burholm should be rebuilt, right? Maybe that's something. I think working in partnership with the councilperson and the neighbors will create great opportunities to make sure that genuine development has the biggest impact possible. And whether it's reduced to writing as community benefit, whether it's put in place as some sort of a program that provides equity to all the residents, it doesn't matter. I think each project is different, but the advice that I would like to give to everyone who's listening is that you have to be able to get your hands dirty to understand what fits. You cannot cookie cut this. You cannot do this. And if you don't try to reach out to the council person, reach out to the neighborhood, you're doomed to fail, or your timeline is going to get very long. It's going to get very long.
So with that, and because we could continue this conversation for a very long time, and I really want to thank all of you for your time. It's been great to have you today. I do want to just encourage you to fill out the survey when it comes to you. There'll be a survey that comes. We have a few more crew events. Crew likes to have happy hours, so there's a happy hour on March 25th. On March 31st, we have a members only event, which is about data disruption. It's really about sort of how retail's been impacted by data. We're doing another on CPACE, which is an energy, a property assessed clear energy incentive program for developers. And on May 17th, Crew has its annual golf outing, which is always lots of fun, and there's still space to sign up. And then John Mitchell, who works for the councilwoman, just shared that City Council voted today to approve the Walter P. Lomax Transparency in Business, a package of 3 bills. Councilwoman, do you know what this? I don't know what this is. So I want to make sure that I'm not trying to sum it up too quickly.
What we quickly just wanted to do was put in the chat legislation that our council passed that will take effect July 1 of this year, that will give all residents of Philadelphia the ability to see who's benefiting from doing business with the city. So instead of just a Black Lives Matter mission statement on your website now, if you do business with the city, we'll know how much that's been valued at, what does your team look like, the demographics of your firm, who's paid what's the value of your contract. And the hope is that because this talking about empowering the tool of transparency. So we put that out there to say to the industry, guys, take a look at it. Although this was just for us here in the city of Philadelphia, but see if it's a tool that you could use voluntarily, to bring some transparency into what you guys do, like we were trying to do with the PIF, so that if you let the community know that you thought about them and equity was important to you on the front end, I guarantee you that your work on the back end to get through the process, it will be so much more smoother. And I have to give a big shout out to this guy, Carl. Can't think of his name. He's going to kill me, but I need to give this anecdote. Cotman Avenue and Rising Sun Avenue, like a half a block down, we lost a Pathmark supermarket. A developer came and just bought the property, right? We were terrified. Guess what he did? And this is going to sound crazy, but this really happened. I'm not making this up. After the developer purchased the property, he came to the council person to ask me to have a meeting in the community, because guess what? He wanted to hear what the community wanted in their own neighborhood. We almost had a heart attack.
Yeah. And good developers will do that.
Yep.
You
So
know,
on that note-
and that's fair. And that is and those are the
Exactly.
developers that will try to make sense. I'm sorry, I didn't want to take too
No,
much.
I think you're absolutely right, Darwin. And I think the message for today was that collectively working together, the city administration, the city council, our legislative branch, our private developers, our organizations like Wistar, all of us sort of working collectively together, we will continue to make Philadelphia the best city in America. We have a fabulous city and we are so proud of it. And we're just lucky to have it. And Councilwoman, I just want to say one last thing, to see that this was named after Walter Lomax, who was a family friend of mine. I missed this in the sort of all the hoopla with the pandemic and everything that happened in early January. I think we just all missed this. And it's just lovely to know that a piece of legislation was placed in his name. He was quite an innovator and quite a powerful figure in our community. And so I know the Lomaxes were proud, and I'm proud to know that you've done that too. So with that, we'll close, and please look for our survey. Thank you.